In this lesson, we'll build the fan blades for the jet engine. So let's go ahead and open this up. So we have now our pieces for our engine. So I'm going to go ahead and take all three of these pieces, and they're all separate right now. I actually want to group those together. So that's going to be Control G to group them. And right now, when we you can see the pivot is located back at the origin. Whenever you group something together, that pivot is going to move back to the origin. So I want to center our pivot back to where it goes on the group, and we'll just call this engine group. And I want to move this entire group back to the origin. Now you can see that as I move it, it's actually deforming, and the reason for that is that we've actually got some history going on in here. So with the all of the curves creating different, creating for instance this rim and the curve being extracted from this geometry, it's creating some unusual results. So what we want to do is select all the geometry, go ahead and go to Edit and Delete by Type History, and then we can come up here to our engine group and move it, and now you can see that we don't get any of those transformation problems. So what we can do is come in here, and now we want to snap this to the origin. So I'm going to turn off the camera, turn on the grid, and just holding down X, I'm going to snap it to the origin, which is that point where those axes cross. Let's do the same thing here, just in case we haven't got it snapped in all axes. And we want that to actually be up here. And so I'm going to hold down X, snap it right to that spot. So it should be right in the center. And you can check that. We can turn on the grid here, and it's actually right in the middle where it should be. Okay, this will make creating our fan blades a little bit easier. Okay, let's go ahead and select the engine. We can now freeze our transformations, which will take all of these transforms back down to 0. And then once we're done with the engine, we'll go ahead and place it back where it goes. So I'm going to go ahead and freeze our transformations. Now we want to create these blades coming in here, and it's going to be a pain to create kind of these overlapping shapes. So we're going to create one and then duplicate it. So we'll create a NURBS primitive cylinder to begin with, and I'll just kind of scale it up, and I want to move it up above the origin, or up above the grid there. You can see it kind of sitting above the grid. I want to move it just a little bit above the grid, and I don't want it to penetrate into the top there, so I'll scale it down a little bit. Okay, same thing here. I want to bring it forward in the Z. Okay, I want it to go right behind the rim that we created, so right behind that. Okay, it could penetrate in a little bit, that's okay. So what I want to do is now shape this a little. So I'm just going to use scale to shape it. So I'm going to scale it a long ways in the Z to make it more of a blade shape, thin it down in the X so it's more like this. Let's move it back again. Okay, and now I want to rotate it just a little bit. So I'm going to rotate it in the Y just a little, and then I want to move the pivot point down here. So we'll move the pivot point, and you can snap it to the origin if you want to. I'm just hitting insert, by the way, to get that pivot point. Should mention insert on the keyboard will take you to your pivot, and then you can move the pivot manually and snap it. Okay, make sure I mention that. Alright, so now that we have our single blade, we need to create a number of blades. So let's go ahead and freeze our transformations. Okay, and so if we were to create a copy, Control D, and then rotate it, you can see where we can sort of get one copy, and we can create a little bit of a blade look there. Okay, but you can see as I rotate that, it's going to take a lot of those blades. So what we can do, and I'm going to go ahead and just kind of rotate this a little bit here and freeze our transforms. Okay, and so what we can do now is use something called duplicate special, which will allow us to do a number of duplications all at once. So let's go into Edit, Duplicate Special, and open up the options. Okay, so the first thing we want to check is make sure that it's a copy or an instance. So we'll just make it a copy. And we can group under parent, world, new group. We'll just leave it as is. And here is where the power comes in. So this will allow us to translate, rotate, or scale each subsequent copy as it's duplicated. So in this case, we want to rotate it. So we'll choose rotation, and we want to rotate it in the Z. All right, so let's go ahead and figure this out. We want it to rotate all the way around, which is going to be 360 degrees. Okay, so we want each copy to rotate a certain amount. So let's say that each copy will rotate 10 degrees. So if each copy rotates 10 degrees around a 360 degree arc, that gives us 36 copies. We have one already, so we're going to, in the number of copies area, put 35 because we're not counting the one that we already have. So what that's going to do is create 35 copies. Each copy is going to be rotated along the Z-axis using this pivot 10 degrees from the previous copy. So 10 degrees, 10 degrees, 10 degrees. So let's see what that looks like. So with just putting in a couple of numbers and putting in a value here, we could hit Duplicate Special, and there we have our complete blades for our engine. Okay, so that Duplicate Special is really powerful for creating elements like this where you've got to have them all translated or rotated a particular amount. And you can play around with the rotation of these. So if I want to maybe rotate this a little bit more, let's freeze that transformation and run that Duplicate Special again. You can see I can kind of close that gap in a little so we can't really see through it as much. Okay. Now we haven't really looked at hierarchy yet, but let's go ahead and open up the outliner. So if we go to Window, you'll see that there's an option here for outliner. This is going to be a listing of everything in our scene. So all the curves that we've used up to this point and all of the geometry. And you can see it all has these sort of generated names that don't really mean anything to us. So we haven't touched it up to this point. And if we leave it untouched until the end of our project, it's going to be really quite messy. And so what we can do is start to come in here and name things. And the reason I thought of it, when dealing with this, is the fact that we now have all of these fan blades in here, and they're just all sitting out here like this. Okay, so we can go in here and select our fan blades by selecting one, then shift selecting all the way at the bottom. And we can hit Control G, and just as we grouped the engine itself, we can group that together, and you can see we have now a new group, and we can call these something. We can call them engine fan blades or something like that, something meaningful to us. We can name the group that, and then if you want to name each individual blade, I'll show you later how we can kind of name those automatically, but we've got those sort of grouped together, and if we want to center that pivot, we can, so it's right up there. And then we've got the engine group itself. Well, we would have dropped the blades inside the engine group. We can just middle drag it up to the engine group, and now it's inside of that group. So we can really start to organize things very well. Now we're also going to have a number of curves here in addition to the geometry that we have, so we can organize those as well. Here's our wing left, and so we can start to just name these things. So cockpit trim, possibly. We can start to name some of these pipes. Here's the fuselage. So we can start to name some of these as well and start to just group things together and separate things out. All right. So now that we've got our fan blade created here at the origin, the next thing that we want to do is to finish out this engine, or start to finish out the engine, by adding the cones on the front and back. And so we'll take a look at that process in the next lesson.